Welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole
and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and we're here to interview world-leading researchers, clinicians, and people with lived experience
to support your practice in being more evidence-based. Well, welcome to Research Works, and we're here today for a very, very special conversation.
Yes, today's interview is a conversation like no other, and you can tell we are so excited about it. Today's interview is actually the first keynote of the AusACPDM conference in Cairns, Australia 2024. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce our guest today, Hannah Diviney.
Welcome.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
That's a great intro. I felt like I wanted to jump in and clarify straight away that I am not a world-class researcher, but I do have some pretty decent lived experience of cerebral palsy that I think should qualify.
Oh, that's actually the most important part of it all, actually, Hannah. So it's huge.
More than it qualifies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure that lots of people who are listening to our conversation today are very familiar with you, Hannah. But for those who aren't, we'd like to share a little bit about you and your amazing work first before we start getting into all of our questions. So Hannah Diviney is an AusACPDM member, leading writer, actor, and disability and women's rights advocate based in Sydney, Australia. She began her career at Mamamia at the age of 15 and since then has become the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Missing Perspectives. She authored I'll Let Myself In, a book all about breaking down doors, claiming space and finding your wheels. You'll see her on social media where she's been known to make some pretty remarkable waves all headed in the right direction when it comes to disability advocacy. Welcome, Hannah.
Woohoo! That sounds so ominous when you say it like that. She's been known to make some waves.
Oh, I love it. We'll get into that.
We'll get to those. We'll describe the waves in great detail.
We sure will.
Who doesn't know?
Cannot wait to get into that. But, you know, this is the Research Works podcast. We can't get into any podcast without doing what we always do, which is the icebreaker. Yes. And I always feel like that's a good way of getting to know someone. So we're going to do one still. Yeah, get ready.
Brace yourself. No, I feel like on the spectrum of icebreaker questions, we've gone with a gentle one today.
This is nice.
Yeah,
Softball?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Softball.
Because you are an esteemed author, Hannah, we thought we would ask the question today. What is the first book you remember reading or listening to?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's actually a surprisingly easy question because the answer is Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Because my mum, when I was in the NICU as a tiny, extremely premature baby, so I can give you guys all the details because the researchers in the room will understand it. But I was born 12 weeks premature, so 12 and a half actually. So yeah, I only weighed like just over a kilo, had to be at a level 3 nursery. So every day when I was in the humidity crib, Mum would bring this giant book that was like a collection of all of Beatrix Potter's stories and sit in like this armchair next to the bed and read to me. And the nurses thought it was hilarious that this first-time mother was like reading to this tiny little baby because they were like, you know, she can't understand you yet, right? Like she recognizes your voice, but she's not up to stories. Like she's got a little bit of a way to go before we get there. But then we laugh about it now because, like, if you look at what I do and the kind of career path that I've gone down and how that's all kind of defined by the umbrella of storytelling, it's actually pretty funny. Like, maybe Mum was onto something.
I think so. I definitely think so.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's very powerful.
Yeah. I think more happens at that time than we could ever understand. And that's
absolutely.
I feel like that's evidence.
Yeah.
That's a really cool one. Okay. So mine, I'm not known to read a lot of books. I feel like because I do so much research, I read so much research articles and I just
don't tend to read books. So
that makes sense.
It does.
You've done your reading for the day.
I've done my reading. Yes, I do listen to podcasts a lot. But when I think back to the book that I actually really enjoyed reading in high school, I mean, I was forced to read it, but it was actually quite good. It was Cloud Street. And it's actually really good. And it was set in Perth. And it was sort of not historic Perth, but, older Perth, about 100 years ago. And they talk about the river and getting prawns out of there. I'm not sure we get prawns out of our river anymore. But I remember the impact it had on me in terms of the appreciation of where I lived. And it was wonderful. So doing an English literature exam on that book was actually really easy. Turns out if you like something, funny, you might do it.
And we should also point out for anyone who hasn't heard of Cloud Street that it's a wonderful novel by Tim Winton if anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah, it is.
Go
fabulous. Find it. Fabulous. Yep. What about you?
All right, Ash, I'm curious. What have we got?
Don't get too excited. I was a bookworm as a kid. I was forever had my nose in a book at dinner time, in the car, which is horrific to think about now because I get so car sick if I even
that sounds
down.
like me. I would always read in the car. I'd take a book to parties. I was that kid.
My emotional support
I love
book.
that. Yeah. I love that.
Exactly.
So the first book I remember being able to read, once you get the hang of it cover to cover, were the Magic Faraway Tree books.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
I love those.
Yeah, they were,
What an adventure.
take you on, such an adventure, transport you to other worlds and places, and I just absolutely loved them.
They're always eating as well.
Yeah.
Always eating.
Always eating.
Yeah.
That's time for another break. Let's eat again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they had the rhythms of life done the right way.
I think you're onto something there as well.
Absolutely. All right. I feel like we've all learned a little bit about each other. So icebreaker achieved. Now we can get stuck into the questions, Hannah. So we thought
nitty-gritty stuff.
Yes. I'd love to start by, I suppose, asking you about your journey so far. You alluded to a little bit of it with our icebreaker question just now, but what was your childhood like living with cerebral palsy?
That's a very good question. I would say it was complicated. And that was for a number of different reasons. As I said, I was born 3.5 months early. And that actually meant that because of the state, like my brain was in, doctors identified a bleed on my brain and all that stuff at that age, that they were able to diagnose me with cerebral palsy pretty quickly.
Okay.
So I had a diagnosis pretty much straight away, and then was actually receiving services from Cerebral Palsy Alliance, or it was the Spastic Centre back then, by 12 weeks of age. So considering that some kids with CP don't get diagnosed till they're 2 because they're not hitting their milestones, I'm fairly lucky in that regard, in that I got the most out of early intervention that it is possible to get. When I was diagnosed with CP, the doctors obviously have to deliver worst case scenario, as you guys would know. And they told my parents that based on the scans of my brain, they thought I would never walk, talk, or feed myself.
Wow.
Obviously, my walking leaves a fair bit to be desired, but and I'll be lucky if I get through a meal without spilling food on my clothes somewhere. But obviously, by virtue of us having this conversation, you can see that didn't come to pass. And there's no particular reason why it didn't come to pass. It's not that my parents did anything special that other parents don't do. It's just luck, and again, the work of that early intervention. So things like physio, OT, speech, psychology eventually when I was old enough to have emotions and start to understand CP. But for me, I was also pretty young when I worked out that I was different. So I was about 3.
Yeah.
Which was slightly earlier than my parents had hoped for. I have since found out. But basically, I was at daycare, and my best friend at the time, we just finished lunch for the day, and she stood up to go and play. And I wanted to go and do the same thing, but obviously didn't move. And kind of looked down at my legs and went, oh, that's weird. Why am I not going anywhere? Like, don't I know how to stand up? And it had never really clicked for me before that, like, I was the kid who needed help to get into a chair, or that I was the only one who still needed support at nap time to get in and out of bed. And then suddenly I was like, oh. And I came home and was like, so Mum, why don't my legs work properly?
Wow.
And I can't remember exactly what she said, but she started to explain that I have cerebral palsy, and obviously did it in an age-appropriate way that got more nuanced as I got older and had more questions. But I think for me, one of the things that it took a long time to wrap my head around was the idea of a permanent disability. Because obviously when you're 3, the concept of forever could be a week.
Yeah.
But then as you get older and you start to understand like time and how things work, coming to terms with the fact that you're a little kid now, but you're going to have this thing until you look like your grandparents is kind of strange and scary. And also, like, there wasn't a lot of representation around of disability back then. Like, I came of age in like the early 2000s and beyond, and back then the real 2 kind of representations of disabled life that I saw were the Paralympics, if I was lucky, maybe like 5 minutes at the end of the evening news, kind of shoved in the back. It would be Kurt Fernley or Louise Savage doing something, and it would probably be someone like the ABC or SBS reporting on them. A lot of the commercial channels didn't really care the way they do now. Like, obviously they have dedicated channels and they make a big deal, so we've come a long way. But it was either that or road safety ads.
Wow. Okay.
Which are obviously presented in a very different way because they encourage people not to make dangerous choices when they're behind the wheel of a car, which is fine. Like, I'm all for that, obviously. But I would really struggle with the end of those ads because they would always show someone in a wheelchair and frame it as though their life was over because they'd made this bad choice. And they'd be sad and looking out the window at the rest of their family, like doing stuff or whatever. And for me, at like age 5, 6, 7 years old, internalizing that people thought my life was over before it had even begun was really weird and strange.
Wow.
It's really powerful.
Yeah. And then, like, you get older, you maybe start seeing a few disabled characters on TV, so you very quickly Google them just to find out who they are, and then you realise that, it's able-bodied actors playing disabled roles. They get to cast off my life as soon as the director yells cut, kind of thing. I didn't really see disabled adults out and about in the world. Pretty much the only contact I had with other disabled people were like kids I would see in therapy settings, or clinics, or like
the hospital,
if it was Botox day at the hospital, or if I was doing like conductive education or physio or whatever. And then I might see a handful of disabled adults, but they were always coincidentally more physically mobile than me, but their speech was affected. So it's only kind of through lots of therapy and self-reflection that I realized that I thought for a while there that I was going to lose the ability to speak.
Okay. Just based on what you saw around you.
Yeah, just based on what I saw.
Yeah, right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess what really comes through in that, Hannah, as you're talking about it, I can't help but to reflect on, and I've heard a few people say this before, it's just this narrative that's based around tragedy.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like you said with the insurance or the road safety ads.
Yeah.
You know,
I remember them.
I do too.
Being a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
I remember those quite vividly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they still have some now that are similar-ish, but they're a lot less than they used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess here, Hannah, it's probably a good way to sort of segue into some of the things that have perhaps maybe motivated you to even be in the area of advocacy work. You know, I can tell by from your experience and your reflections, you know, you're a deep thinker and it's probably what got you to this place. But is there something in particular that you remember that got you to think, you know, I want to be in advocacy?
Well, it's interesting you ask because my family have always kind of had this attitude of, we're doing pretty well, so we have a responsibility to give back.
Yeah.
So whether that would be fundraising for Cerebral Palsy Alliance, or back when you used to have like those giant equipment lists instead of the NDIS, we would do things like the City to Surf and say, okay, we've raised, you know, 15 grand. The next 3 people on the list, give them what they need as much as you can using that.
Yeah.
Using that money until it runs out, or just, and that's something that my parents and my grandparents were always really big believers in, like across the community. If you have it to give, you should do it. But it's interesting, the idea of being an advocate was actually something I really strongly rejected for a long time, because as a kind of tween teenager, I could think of nothing worse than talking about my disability all the time.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be defined by my disability. I didn't want that to be the only thing that people kind of knew me for or saw of me, or the only part of me that they recognized as worth something, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I got to be a bit older, like in terms of being a teenager, and started being exposed to these kind of advocacy communities on social media across like Instagram and Twitter, and seeing the work of some incredible people like Carly Finlay and Chloe Hayden and just Kia Brown, like Imani Baba, and just like paying attention to like Stella Young and like learning a bit more about disabled history, because there was suddenly a community there. And that started to trickle in, and then we got to kind of 2020, and I saw the way that disabled people were being neglected or ignored, kind of amplified by the pandemic, and the way that people were being very blasé about the health and well-being of disabled people. And I started to think about how I was quite lucky to have been given a voice, because I know so many people who literally can't speak. It doesn't mean they're any less intelligent, but unfortunately they don't often get the chance to prove that, because it's just assumed by society at large. And then I wrote an article for the ABC about ways to be a good ally to disabled people.
Right.
And I happened to just like they make you do the little bio at the end. And I just happened to throw in the words disability advocate, just didn't think about it. And then from there it kind of snowballed. Suddenly people were reaching out to me being like, can we get your thoughts on this? Can we get your thoughts on that? And it was like, oh, suddenly I've stepped into this whole new identity that I probably could have embraced a long time ago, and sort of had embraced in lots of different ways. I just wasn't ready to own the title necessarily.
Put a label on it. So to speak.
That makes a whole lot of sense.
And I think, you know, there were maybe I'm trying to think in timeline-wise, a year or so after the pandemic, you, shall we say, went viral with a couple of instances on Twitter, X now, formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, we can still call it Twitter. It's fine because
it's easier,
Elon will just have to deal.
yeah, that's true. Hello, Elon, if you're watching.
Hi.
I feel like we can't get too far, further into our conversation without covering these tweets, and it caused some serious discourse on the internet, which I think is really powerful. And
I didn't mean for that to happen.
How great,
but it did, and I think it's fantastic. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, perhaps we'll read the tweets out and then we can talk about those a little bit.
I haven't heard these in a while. Let's see how they age.
So in June 2022 was to Lizzo. Hey Lizzo, my disability, cerebral palsy, is literally classified as spastic diplegia, where spasticity refers to unending painful tightness in my legs. Your new song makes me pretty angry and sad. Spaz doesn't mean freaked out or crazy. It's an ableist slur. It's 2022. Do better. And then the second one, 6 weeks later to
Gosh,
Beyonce.
I was precocious, wasn't I?
I don't know if precocious is the right word.
That was amazing.
I think it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. But it did stop there.
I certainly wouldn't be brave enough to call out Beyonce, but you did.
Yeah.
Beyonce used the word spaz in her new song Heated. Feels like a slap in the face to me, the disabled community, and the progress we tried to make with Lizzo. Guess I'll just keep telling the whole industry to do better until ableist slurs disappear in music.
Whew. So talk
we're
about
going to have to. We have a fair bit to unpack around that. So you're going to get like the behind the scenes sort of
love
strip,
it.
I guess.
Thank you.
But,
we love it.
About a week before the Lizzo thing, I just finished filming Latecomers, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is a TV show you can watch now on SBS On Demand, where I played the lead character who happened to have cerebral palsy, and I inadvertently made a piece of television history that I also didn't mean to own, in that I became the first person, as far as we know, with a disability in Australia to do a sex scene on television. So it was my first acting job. Didn't have any experience as an actor. Was always just a drama kid. Like, fell into this role completely by accident. So I just kind of finished that. And my head was spinning. It had been an intense couple of weeks, and I was like, I'm ready for things to calm down and for me to maybe hibernate for a little bit. Little did I know. And then the thing with Lizzo came about because, like I said, I follow a great number of incredible disability advocates and activists online, and some of them had started posting about this Lizzo song that they'd heard and being upset about the language that was used. So I went and double-checked because I was like, hopefully they've somehow misinterpreted it.
Yeah.
Because
misheard,
it really seemed to go against what Lizzo at the time was publicly known for, which was acceptance, empathy, like radical positivity, all of that kind of stuff. I was like, this really doesn't seem to gel with that. But I went and listened and was like, oh, no, there it is. Okay. That's not good.
Yeah.
And I wrote the tweet. It took me less than 5 minutes. I think it was like the June long weekend. So I just wrote the tweet, put my phone down, went back to doing what I was doing with my family, picked my phone up maybe a couple of hours later and went, ow, that's hot. And then went, what? Why does my phone feel like it's currently trying to burn me? Like, what's happening? Wow. And then you just see like the flood of blue, and I was like, oh. Whoops.
I think that's the definition of blowing up.
Yeah. That wasn't meant to happen. And honestly, like if I could the only thing I would redo about that situation is I would probably change the wording of freaked out and crazy, because I did get some very correct messages letting me know that to some other people that was also an ableist slur. And obviously, like, a person's definition of ableism and what bothers them is going to depend on their personal experience. For me, those particular words didn't trigger anything, but that doesn't mean they weren't triggers for other people. So that would be the only thing that I would redo. And then, the Lizzo thing started getting so popular that I was like, someone who knows Lizzo is going to see this, and there's probably going to be something that happens, whether it's someone from her team reaches out or what have you. And at that point, the kind of flip side of going really viral and having all of the attention on you is a lot of it is not nice. And so there were people being quite nasty online, and I was like, oh, okay, this means it's really gotten outside the echo chamber of people who are always going to be telling me I'm doing a good job. I guess
that supportive
I'll
community.
try and take this as like a twisted compliment, because like clearly it's making a difference. And then a couple of days later, I think it was like the Monday of the long weekend, one of my friends messaged me in all caps going, she changed it, look at her Instagram, go. And I was like, what? Like eating my breakfast spoon halfway to my mouth going, huh? And then the phone started ringing, and I was like, oh boy, if it was going to be a big deal before, now that she's changed it, it's going to be a huge deal now. Like that night I logged onto my emails, and there was an email from a journalist at the New York Times, and I was like, like, this is ridiculous. This is a prank. Somebody just knows that, like, as the journalist writer kid, the New York Times is a big deal to me. So they've just,
of course,
like, made up a journalist's name or whatever. And so I'm Googling this person before I respond to the email. And then, like, their official byline comes up, and I was like,
wow, this is real.
It's happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on the front page of the New York Times. All right, this is fine. And then, 6 weeks later, my Twitter was still kind of a dumpster fire. People were still finding it and still expressing their views. And someone tagged me, and I think they were trying to be like quite snarky, and they were like, "Hey, so you're going to call out Beyonce now too?" And I was like, what?
Oh, there's another one.
What are you talking about? And so I've like quickly gone and looked up the lyrics going, please let this be a mistake.
Unfortunately.
And then I read it and gone, damn it. And like she used it twice, unfortunately. So I was like, okay, that's really not a mistake. So then I've like come downstairs to my mum, who was just like calmly watching TV. And I'm like, Mom, I think I have to call out Beyonce. And she's kind of looked at it, heard the situation and gone, yeah, I think you do. And I'm going, but her fans. And she's going, I know, because obviously like the Beehive is one of the most
they're pretty formidable
and well-known fan bases in the world. So I was like, oh dear God. Like if I thought it was intense with Lizzo, it's about to go up 100 degrees.
She was your practice round. She was your practice round for the Beyonce, right?
Yeah. And then this disability organization called Higher Up, they often got me to write pieces for their like newsletter, and they were like, hey, would you mind writing a piece about the Beyonce thing and explaining everything? So I did that. And then I get an email from them saying, hey, it's going to be picked up by The Guardian. Hope that's okay. I'm like, I guess so. And then I get an email from, it might have been a Twitter DM from one of The Guardian journalists going, hey, just checking in. Just wanted to apologize for what's about to happen to your inbox, your mentions, like this is about to get intense. So then they published it, and it was the #1 story in the country for a couple of days. On the Guardian website. And I woke up because you got to remember, like Lizzo cultivates an air of approachability and like she seems like someone that kind of just is a regular person who became famous, whereas Beyonce is not that.
She's kind of
Beyonce
born
has a
famous.
very-
Aura about her. She does.
She's very mystical and like kind of high level, and you think, well, yeah, she only goes out when she wants to. Like she really controls the narrative. Every time the woman breathes, there's a think piece. It's a big deal.
It's celebrity status, huge.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh well, there's no way she's gonna change it. Like that would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I remember I woke up to my phone ringing at like 6 a.m. and I've answered it and gone, hello? And it was like a live radio interview that I didn't know. That they got my number and they were like, hi, we just wanted to talk to you and see how you felt about Beyonce changing the lyric.
Oh.
And I'm like,
She
oh, I feel great. Like I was like, I totally know what I'm talking about. Meanwhile, I'm like putting the phone down in a minute going, Beyonce changed the lyric. Like, trying to pretend and like play it cool this whole time.
Yeah. At 6 a.m. and you don't really know what's going on.
That's
And then being like,
incredible.
oh, the phone's just going to keep ringing all day. Yeah.
Wow.
But I think if I could draw up a bingo card of pretty much every possible insult you could hurl at a woman in particular, but also, unfortunately, because Lizzo and Beyonce happen to be both women of colour, there were a lot of allegations of racism thrown my way.
That's tough.
I was called the poster child for white privilege at one point, and I went, I'm the poster child. Like, really? I think there's a couple of million people who come before me on that list.
Yeah, there's a few other people ahead of you in that line, I think.
Wow.
Like, okay. And you know, you just kind of have to go with it because you're like, what else am I going to do?
Yeah.
And you can't respond. Like that would make it worse.
Just flares it up,
Yes,
doesn't it?
yeah.
It created this global conversation around ableist language, and it put a lot of it brought a lot of people into spaces connected with disability that had never had reason to be in them before.
Yes.
So if I had to do it again, I definitely would. But I think what people understood is what people kind of struggled to understand was that I didn't tweet with the intention of calling them out or getting them in trouble in that sort of way. Like if there had been a way for me to privately contact them and be like, hey guys, just letting you know. Like unfortunately I don't have those details, so Twitter was my method of choice.
You don't have a direct line to Beyonce?
No, unfortunately I don't. Even now.
Hannah, can I just say there, like, for the purpose of pulling it all together, because this is for the conference, we need to talk more later as well. So we'll talk more. So stay tuned for that episode.
Yes.
But everything that you did there lines up so incredibly well with the conference themes in terms of respect, respond, and reimagined. You asked for respect. You were brave.
Yeah.
And
because of that bravery, they actually did respond.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that they were. I feel like their response was driven a lot because they both identify as marginalised women. They both know the particular weight that language and words can carry, and have probably felt their sting in other ways. I think if I had asked a white, straight, heterosexual, able-bodied male to do that, the response might have been different. But instead it was very graceful and they made it easy, no problem.
Yeah. There's no doubt that in terms of the future and what you've set up there, that's been incredible and it's incredibly inspiring. Thank you for sharing that story. I loved to get the behind the scenes of that, because it was just, it's a tweet. That's all you see. But everything that happened.
I remember seeing it. And it's just, for everyone else, it's something that you see on the news feed and, things pass you by, but for you lived that for, a substantial amount of time and copped all of the backlash and criticism that came with that. So I think you're pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing, Hannah.
Oh, thanks.
Amazing.
And I think it's important, to stress, I guess, that this isn't the first time someone said something mean or uncomfortable about my disability. That's the reason why that particular word triggered what it did. And I think every disabled person has been in a situation, whether it's through language or actions or what isn't said even, where they've been made to feel uncomfortable or they've been made to feel small. So kind of just an extension of that.
Yeah.
It reminds
just on
us
a
all
much
to
bigger
stand up.
platform.
Yeah, exactly. It does. And then now people are aware of that. Like you said, people outside of our usual spheres are actually thought about it. And, words have meaning. You can't just throw them out there.
And for every aggressive message that I got 10 more that said, hey, I didn't realize this word was considered this way. I'm going to make sure I never use it, or I call out my friends if I hear them use it. Or thank you for standing up for me because my kid has been really struggling with being called names at school, and
that makes.
This is going to help.
Yeah.
Really cool. Yeah. So Hannah, to finish off, are there any, I know there will be, but I know there's lots of things you've got going on at the moment, but is there anything particularly exciting or upcoming that you'd like to share with us and everyone watching and listening today in terms of projects you've got coming up?
I think the biggest thing will probably be that on December 4 this year, the day after International Day of People with Disabilities, so a very strategic choice, I will be addressing the National Press Club down in Canberra.
Whoa!
No big deal. It's fine.
No big
I feel
deal.
like we need a sound effect or something.
I'm not stressing about it at all.
No,
okay.
cool, calm and collected.
Wow, what an opportunity.
I'm not imagining what it might be like to speak in front of the Prime Minister and possibly outline to him the things that need to be done better for disabled people in the country. That's not a problem at all.
No big deal.
No, it'll just come.
So there will obviously be people in the room at the National Press Club, but the really cool part is that the entire country, again, no big deal, will be able to watch live because these speeches are broadcast on the ABC every week.
Yes, they are.
Cannot wait for that, Hannah. Congratulations. That just reflects all the work you've done, but the bravery of stepping out into all of it. And you've told us the story behind it. And wow, that's inspiring. It inspires me. Yeah. And this is why for all of us as researchers and clinicians, it's the lived experience. You cannot underestimate how powerful and important that is. Yeah.
Not at all. And I think the other important thing to consider as a researcher or as a clinician is you're probably not the first person that your patient has come into contact with that is asking them these types of questions or asking them to think about their disability in this way. So it's just being aware of the fact that the potential for medical trauma is vast. And it's also cumulative. So it might be the first time you've asked me, but it might be the 1,000th time I've actually answered it.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. Great.
Really good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Hannah, we could talk to you, like we said, for a much longer period of time. We feel really sad we've got to close this one off now, but we're going to keep chatting when we close this off still.
We will.
But thank you so much for opening up the AusACPDM conference, the first keynote. What a privilege it's been. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, and I know that, both of us here and everyone watching and listening today will be cheering you on in December.
Can't wait.
Thanks. I'm going to need all the help I can get, I think.
Positive vibes all your way. Well, thanks to everyone who's tuned into this, and we'll talk to you all again really soon. Bye.
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 That's a wrap. We only went just a bit over time. We're at 39 minutes. But
That's okay.
That's fine. Sarah will be fine with that. I was like, Sarah, like, you'll be fine.
We like to talk.
Yeah. And I was thinking in my head, because it's a 90-minute segment, someone else is speaking for 35 minutes. So they thought there'll be 20 minutes for questions, but you're not going to be there. So you can't answer those questions. So we just chatted.
We did them a favour.
We did.
Sure.
Are you happy with how that went?
I am really happy. Thanks, guys.
Great.
That was beautiful. What an amazing, you're an amazing storyteller.
Yeah,
that was great.
I could just listen to you all day.
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome to. If you want to get my audiobook version of my book, you can listen to me and read the whole thing.
Do you narrate it?
I do, yeah. Which I thought was like a couple of days of like hours at a time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have to sit in a recording studio, and I thought I was pretty good at reading out loud because like I've done it a lot, and I also I've done a lot of speaking and stuff.
Yeah.
But oh my God, by the end of it, I was like, there is no air left in my lungs.
You're like, why did I write so much?
Yeah. Or there'd be times where I'd look down and be like, why did I not put a full stop or a comma? Why did I make the sentence so long?
And did you start to panic? Like, when am I going to get to take a breath? How's this going to work?
Like, what am I doing? Or there'd be like occasions where I'd be like, the pronunciation of that was weird. Or
do you have to go back to do those again, or do you just
No.
Okay.
So like,
no, you have to go back.
Right.
Go back to where though?
Yeah, how far back?
Like wherever the mistake is, and then they just
Slice it in.
Yeah.
bring it forward, and with the audio magic, slice it in. Yeah,
People like producer Ed will have to do that.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
they're good people, aren't they? You do need them for
They
these
are.
things.
They are.
Yeah. Very patient people.
Yeah. Hey, Hannah, what we didn't get to ask, which I'm just really curious about, is that I'm curious to know what your advice would be for therapists who are currently working in the field with kids, with teenagers. You know what our focus often is, but what would you like it to be more of an emphasis on? I feel like you'd be such a great voice for that.
I think there's a couple of things. So for me, whenever I was meeting with like doctors or clinicians, and I'm thinking like specifically kind of orthopedic surgeons who featured quite heavily in my childhood, unfortunately, they would explain things over my head. So I would be in the room, but they'd never explain to me directly what was going on. They'd always be talking to my parents.
Okay.
And then my parents would be left to kind of answer my questions once I tried to piece everything together. And I did give that advice to the combined board of the Sydney Children's Hospital network, and their response was, oh, yeah, I guess we probably should talk to kids more. And I kind of was like, you're a children's hospital. How do I, what? Like, duh. But also, just being aware that, like, you are probably not the first person that's asked them something or poked or prodded them or, and that they might have questions or explanations that they need. Like, I think one of my kind of enduring memories of the first time I met Sarah McIntyre was like, this was just when the CP register was starting. Like, she was literally sitting out at Westmead waiting for kids with CP to appear so that she could ask them to be on the register.
Yeah.
And she came and gave us the spiel and talked to my mum, and then I had a bunch of questions, and she sat there and patiently answered all of them from 7-year-old me for me to be like, well, why does it work like this? What are you collecting information for? And what?
So good.
And what's the process? And like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And granted, some kids wouldn't think to ask that, maybe, but she didn't brush me off. She didn't leave it to my parents to try and explain.
Yeah.
She sat there and patiently went through them all.
Yeah.
And I think also just being aware that, like, being disabled is like having a full-time job with no breaks and no pay. And it's not something we chose. it's not something we signed up for. It's no one's fault most of the time, depending on the circumstances of how a person becomes disabled. But if we're frustrating you because we're not doing our exercises, or we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, or we meet with you when we're in a particularly grumpy mood at that time, it's because we've been doing this all day, all week, all month, all year, all our life. Like I have a friend who's in his 30s, and he was joking around with me the other day. He sent me a message and he said, whoever said life is short clearly didn't have cerebral palsy.
Wow.
Because it takes a lot. And like, by the time you get to being a teenager, you're like, I've been doing this for so long already, and I have so much more to do, but I also don't know what the future holds. And it's very scary. And for a lot of young people, especially, like most of our friends who are able-bodied are excited about the blank possibility of the future because anything could go there. Whereas for me, I know that my feelings about the blank future weren't excitement. They were quite scared because I didn't know if anything went there at all.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really good perspective for people to.
So just having empathy and like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being able to realize that like this might be your 5th client of the day, but they've also been carrying this for their whole life. So whatever you can do to make the loads lighter in that moment is a good thing.
Yeah.
And Hannah, is that, I mean, we didn't even get to touch on this today in the keynote, but I have to ask you, Missing Perspectives. I feel like as you have been talking there, I feel like Missing Perspectives is the perfect name for it. Can you tell us a bit more about Missing Perspectives?
So Missing Perspectives is a global media company that operates at a very grassroots level that aims to tell the stories and amplify the voices of women and girls around the world. And we're 3 years old now, and we're very proud of the work we're doing.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
So do I.
Jeepers.
You are a very impressive woman.
Thank you.
You get that a lot. I feel like everyone who meets you must say that. And I love that you say thank you, you accept it, you take it. It's actually really cool.
Yeah.
I'm working on it. It takes a lot for my brain to be like, that's a compliment. What do I do with that?
Yes,
Because
right.
Bat that away.
An unfortunate byproduct of growing up in a world not built for you really is that you can have pretty low self-esteem. Like even though I seem pretty extroverted and confident and am most of the time, like otherwise I wouldn't be able to do what I do or the thought of things like the National Press Club would send me into the fetal position, which it still might do. We've got a couple months before that. But I don't have a very high self-esteem, and I think that's kind of an unfortunate byproduct of the kind of not that I missed out on anything, or not that like people weren't lovely and kind. They were, but there were also not very nice things that happened. And
it's always the proportions, isn't it, of the good stuff versus the stuff that's not so positive.
Yeah. It takes a lot of good things to try and does a negative thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good time to finish anyway, because I think we have lost Hannah.
She's back.
We got so close.
We did. I was talking and then I realised you guys hadn't moved, and I was like, oh.
we were trying to fill in time as well. We thought that last bit after we say goodbye for conference, we'll keep the whole thing as the podcast episode. Are you happy with that?
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
Yep. I think we should do that because
there's some
there was so much there to talk
you
about.
were so generous with what you shared, Hannah. So
absolutely.
Yeah. The part that you didn't hear us say, which I know you know, and you would have experienced that on Twitter as well. It doesn't matter sometimes how many positive compliments you do get. It's that one negative one that stands out, right? It's like it's in bold, all caps and size
especially
20
for
font.
someone like me who has a very anxious brain. Like I tend to store those guys.
They
for life, unfortunately.
No,
they like to the highlights reel of those at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m.
Correct.
They just roll on out.
Okay.
Well, that was just such an amazing conversation. And like we keep saying, we could talk for hours upon hours.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, we definitely could. We're going to have to do that at some point.
Yes,
we'll reschedule that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Hannah, for being so generous with your time and with your experiences that you shared with us. I know it's,
thank you for having me.
Tricky to do sometimes, and you just, hold it all so beautifully.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice.
No, it's so good. And I hope everyone can follow you, right? So we'll put links for all your, what are they called? The handles?
She's got it.
So you're pretty much mostly active on X, Twitter, whatever, and Instagram. So I think I follow you on Instagram.
And then I've also just launched a weekly newsletter via Substack.
Substack. Oh, nice. Look at you. Okay.
Called Hannah's Secret Internet Diary. It's not very secret, obviously. It's just to try and make my writing a bit more open, I think. But I've just recently launched that. So, and you get everything on my Substack for free. If you decide you want to subscribe and pay, that's only to support me. You don't get any extra content. But
amazing.
Yeah, if anyone wants to do that, come and get comfy inside my brain, I guess, if you dare.
Disclaimer is there. No, I love that. I love you start a Substack. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you once again. Again, I can see that we'd spiral into another conversation here, so we better end it. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to everyone again really soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.